knowledge she's a loser. How did you know me?
How's everyone doing today? You guys feeling good? We thank you for being with us here at the international panel today. And first and foremost, this is obviously really special. You could have been anywhere else in the world, right? But you chose to be with us here this weekend. So thank you so much. I want to go ahead and introduce our lovely gentleman and our lovely lady. We have Jamie Pearson, and she is the president of New Holland Group. We also have Garen Angel, founder of Magical. And we have Dare Odumosu, also known as Dr. O, and he is with Zalira Therapeutics. So we're going to have a nice conversation here. They are really the best of the best in their field. So let's go ahead and kick things off by talking about the future of cannabis and psychedelics and how that looks like on an international scale.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And to share the stage with very interesting and wonderful people who are, as you said, Kelly, are just amazing people in their rights. I think to sort of set the background, we're up here because in some way we play on that international front when it comes to cannabinoids or cannabis and psychedelics, and across multiple countries on multiple focus areas, from products to traditional medicines. And to the question that Kelly has asked, what is the future of cannabis and psychedelics on the international front? I usually try to set a reference point and say that with the United States being the reference point, and then from then we say, what does international look like? I say in the US, there exists this federal-state dichotomy. And that federal-state dichotomy has created a system where we have north of 37 to 40 states with some form of a program in the medical, adult use, whatever you want to call it, sort of format. That does not exist in the traditional international markets. In countries like Germany, countries like Australia, countries like Malaysia, countries like New Zealand, there is not a federal-state dichotomy. So the future in that place is that they are already living the future of being a highly and properly regulated market, being a structured market from a federal level, such that from regulation to enforcement to process and product entry, there is a very, very well-validated and well-understood path to entry. And so to the extent that we think about the future of those emerging markets, we tend to think, at least one of the ways we tend to think about it is the removal of the prohibitions that define it, whether it's by federal legalization as they're looking for in Germany and those likes of things. So the long route to the answer is the future of cannabis and psychedelics in some of this international markets should be viewed through the lens of their federal governments removing or relaxing or reshaping their regulations to allow for commerce and proper business.
And for those that may not know you, can you just give us a little brief introduction on Zalira Therapeutics and what you're getting into here in 2023?
Fantastic. My name is Dr. Oludare Odumosu. Most people call me Dr. O. I think it's because Oludare is very long. And I am the Global Chief Executive Officer for Zalira Therapeutics, which is a traditional biopharmaceutical company that creates pharmaceutical medicines from cannabinoids. We are a publicly listed company in Australia with footprints in the United States, in Germany, New Zealand, UK, and expanding into the world's emerging markets. So we play in the highly regulated drug development space, from drug development, commercialization, strategies in those markets, research platforms, and yeah, and technology platforms for drug development. So we are a pure biotech company focused on cannabis.
Hi, I'm Jamie Pearson. Most of you know me, those of you that do know me. I'm the former CEO and vice chairman of the board of Bang Inc. We were a publicly traded cannabis edible company. I worked for Bang for 7 years before I started New Holland Group, which I just started in August of last year. At Bang, I took a product that was really popular in California and expanded it through licensing to 7 US states, including an 11-state deal that we did with Trulieve. And when I left, Bang was with Trulieve in Massachusetts and Florida, and we were getting ready to expand into the rest of their states where edibles were allowed. And then I also brought Bang into Canada with Indiva. We were the number 1, 2, and 6 chocolate in Canada. And then I took our CBD line into 9 European countries through distribution agreements. And what I'll tell you is, to answer the question that Dr. O just answered, from my perspective, having taken a CPG brand across state lines and across different country lines, I agree with him. One of the issues we have in the US isn't just the dichotomous state-federal regulation that we're battling. It's also the concept that America is the epicenter of cannabis. We have, in America, always been the producers and creators of the biggest brands. So think about Coca-Cola, Nike, Microsoft. We are a CPG mecca in this country. We know how to get shit done. I probably shouldn't say that before we record, sorry. On the branding side of things and creating brands and doing the deals internationally to bring our brands across state and country lines. What's different about cannabis and I would say psychedelics is that these are products that have a dual purpose. They're both CPG, but they also have a medical component. There's also an agricultural component. So then the question is, what are we? Are we agriculture? Are we a retail play? Are we a CPG play? It isn't just a matter of brands. It's a matter of know-how. And the reality is, agricultural know-how exists in places outside of the US. Branding know-how exists in places outside of the US. Medical know-how exists in places outside of the US. So I believe that the future of cannabis could very well be created somewhere else because our political system is broken. So I suspect that the Coca-Cola or Nike of cannabis might come from somewhere else, because there's going to be more opportunity in places where they have banking and they have the ability to do traditional advertising. So I anticipate Germany being a big factor in what comes next, because when Germany goes federally rec and they allow banking, there is no way that the US government is going to kick Germany off the SWIFT system and no longer allow wires. So we're going to see the tail wag the dog of banking, and we're going to see the tail wag the dog of marketing. And all of the struggles that we have here because of federal prohibition are going to be forced open on the European continent. To some degree, it's happening already in South America. I want to give my colleague here a chance to speak, so I'm going to pass the mic to him, let him do his thing. But that's what I think about the federal, or about the future of cannabis internationally.
I was actually just clearing my throat because I had a little something to go ahead.
I didn't even hear you clear.
Oh.
He's like,
No, I wasn't doing that. I actually had a little frog in my
I didn't hear you clear your throat. I just want to hear what you have to say,
But-
because I am fangirling right now, because do you know who this is?
Do you know?
Somebody
If you
that knows
don't,
a
you
lot
have-
more about this than I do.
you know, he has really great energy. I don't know if it has to do with his company, you know, being called Magical, or that his last name is Angel, but he is, you know, a force among us. So if you have the opportunity to say hello, please do say hello to him and talk to him after the panel. With that said, let's touch a little bit about what we were talking about. And you did mention Germany, but what are also some other regions of the world that look to offer the most potential? And with that, will the market support import, export globally?
Yes.
Well, first, you got to tell everybody who you are. They got to know who you are.
So, hi,
Or
everyone.
do we know who he is or no? Who is he?
So, hi, everyone. It's great to see you guys. Epic Candidelic. I love that they brought it back in an even better format. I had just gotten here. We've been working so hard at the office on amazing new products for this year. I am so excited. February 28th, we're going to do a product release that will shake the industry up. I'm incredibly excited about this. It's something that I put my heart and soul into. But to answer the question, because you're here to get information about real opportunities and how to help the world, to me, the biggest opportunity is in all of the Muslim countries as they reassess the war on drugs. Because, as we're talking about banking falling, we're talking about cultures changing and evolving. And this is really the opportunity for everyone to come together and start to understand each other as these barriers fall. So when I'm assessing, how do you do things moving forward, a lot of my focus is really in Muslim countries, because I think there's bridges that need to be built in this world, and that's probably the biggest bridge that needs to be built culturally, because it's so beautiful. Their culture and our cultures are so beautiful, but there's been so many misunderstandings along the way, and a lot of them have had to do with drugs, because if someone's in one of those countries, formally you would be beheaded. So, when you think about the evolution of humankind, and these compounds help you deal with stressful situations. And I think if you remove them from a society, the testosterone and the aggression increases. And when you're able to have things that allow your brain to decompress, it's an equalizer. And so that's really, on an international basis, what excites me the most.
Very cool. And with that, do we feel medical and recreational will make a big difference in potential market activity abroad, and in what ways?
Repeat that. Actually, I didn't catch that.
Okay. Do we feel medical and recreational will make a big difference in potential market activity abroad, and in what ways will that happen?
All right, I'll start, and then I'll let the smarter people chime in. Yes and no. Yes, in a lot of ways, because again, you look at the example that Jamie gave, which is Germany right now, because Germany is hot, and the whole world is kind of just waiting for what comes out of it. So it's very important we pay attention to what we call it. So we've already fallen for the sort of nomenclature around medical or rec or adult use. And I dare say that even the nomenclature of medical is a fig leaf, right? Everybody knows what's behind the fig leaf, right? Like, you're not confused about what's behind it. It was a portal to bring down the temperature using real world understanding and tapping on the empathy buttons of our political system, if there is any there. But it was really just an opportunity to sort of make the room a little bit cooler so that these programs could get started. So the idea that we have some form of a medical or rec, these are natural compounds. So natural compounding, and now we're putting them in a bucket of calling them names. Yes, it will still be the portal for which laws are sort of maybe drafted and enacted. But over time, my expectation is that that will fall off. We don't talk about acetaminophen from a medical or rec. We don't talk about caffeine from a medical or rec. The sort of the plant consumed form of it is coffee and other forms, right? But the sort of molecular entity name for what's in it is caffeine, tobacco, nicotine. No one is going, oh, that's rec tobacco. So over time, I expect for those nomenclatures to not matter as much. But in the beginning, I believe they will matter because we're waiting now. It's federally legal in Germany as medicine, but we're waiting for the federal legalization that makes it accessible, and hence we call it rec, or we call it adult use. But all of that is going to fall away, is my opinion.
That's an interesting perspective, and I was trying to really just take in what you were saying rather than think about what I wanted to say. And I think talking about medical and adult use as nomenclature is spot on. I always called it the Trojan horse. In California, we had a medical program, and anybody could get a card, and it was just a way for people to get access legally and possess legally cannabis, which would make you above the law, so to speak, because you had this medical card. One of the things that happened, I spoke at the CanadaDataCon yesterday, and the conversation on the international panel came out, and they said, well, what happens in Germany if the EU doesn't allow them to have adult use cannabis? Because there is the UN guidelines, the EU's subject to that, and Germany's subject to the EU. Well, what happens then? And one of the panelists said, well, it's real simple. They'll just lower the barrier of entry for the medical program and use the Trojan horse to allow them to just, everybody can have access to it medically, and then they're not breaking any rules. And that is one of the interesting concepts around how do we use this fig leaf to get human beings access to a plant that makes them feel better. And the example I think about in terms of medical versus adult use, one of my clients in Israel has a product that they are doing clinical trials on with fibromyalgia patients. Now, fibromyalgia expresses itself in pain, sleep disorder, and anxiety, a combination of the three. Not all patients have all three, but all three of those things can be part of fibromyalgia. Well, then you have an opiate, an Ambien, and a alprazolam, and do you really want to prescribe all three of those things to one person? And how would you do that effectively? But we can treat pain and anxiety and sleep with cannabis with one plant compound. So what is the impact of doing clinical trials on patients that are suffering from things like Parkinson's and fibromyalgia and anxiety and all of these things that we go to the doctor and get these addictive and harmful chemicals for, and all of a sudden we find out, oh, I could actually grow a plant in my backyard and consume this product and not get addicted and have relief. What's happening through the American medical Trojan horse system that has then caused the adult use to go across the country is that people like my mother, who would never use an illegal substance, feel relief because she'll dip her toe in the water now that it's medically legal. And then what other things have you lied to us about? What other things are we not allowed to do that would actually benefit us? And I think when we talk about PTSD and psychedelics and MDMA and all of the ketamine and the things that we're figuring out that these people who are suffering, humanity is suffering, and because we do dumb things like war, then we have ways to help heal our brains and heal our hearts. And I think what's happened with cannabis and this nomenclature fig leaf crap that we're doing that's helping us get access to the plant, it is changing the world because people access empathy in ways that their brain can't access alone. And so, as you're saying, it's less testosterone and more understanding. The world's becoming more empathetic as plant medicine is gaining popularity.
Yeah, and Garen, we were talking about that, about empathy, and tell us a little bit about everything that you're doing, creating that movement and changing the narrative with people with PTSD and the veterans as well.
Just allowing people to have something that they care for is how you start to solve stress, right? I think when people have a plant and they can care for it and they can watch it grow, and then if they consume it and it makes them feel better, it's an instant uplift for everything in their life, their morale, their self-awareness, and their confidence, because they're starting to take care of themselves. The biggest challenge really is that people fall victim to the medical system where you need someone else to tell you what to do. There is nothing else in your life that when you're at a dead end that like you need a prescription for. So you have to just take care of your own stuff. And I think that that's really why all of this is becoming legalized, is because people have realized that there's access and the laws are changing because consumption is changing. And we have such a mental health crisis that that's really the problem. But I want to go back to the last question, because there was one segment that got left out, and that was the import-export opportunities, because at the end of the day, this is about international business. And the import-export opportunities, it is going to be about brands, but this is a plant that can be grown very, very much through AI. You see what ChatGPT does? Like our technology, we can grow a plant with such consistency and do it anywhere in the world with a seed, a clone, or a tissue culture. So I think that there's a lot of pipe dream around import-export. I think very, very low-wage countries have a shot at it, but that's the only business. Anybody that is giving valuation to export of cannabis, you should discount that business plan, because I don't see how that's profitable. I think countries are denationalizing, and they're trying to do as much within their own borders as far as production now. And so just as you're evaluating your own businesses and investing in the space, that's my one word of advice. Unless it's tech, unless it's biotech, that can be transferred because it has IP.
I was going to say to you, if nothing else is said on that point, and we go home, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, in the world we live in today, even in biotech, which is where I play, tech transfer. I've managed assets as far as 11, 15 years ago, pre-COVID, in 190 countries of the world. I've done product tech transfer in every continent except Antarctica, and I never, ever left my seat in Philadelphia in the United States. So, to your point, you know, when people talk about import-export, I laugh. If I can do pharmaceutical grade at the highest regulated levels, FDA, TGA, B-Pharm, EMA, tech transfers for drugs into countries like, you know, France, Spain, without leaving my seat. And during COVID, we launched cannabinoid-based medicines under the auspices of the TGA in Australia, and I could not step into Australia until last November. So when people were putting so much into, oh, we're going to grow it in, pick a country, then we're going to move it. That's good and fine. But with each understanding of what we can do and what we can do better, I 100% agree that we should begin to discount that conversation.
The only thing that is a question mark for me, though, because you did bring up the low-cost labor countries. When you take a country like Colombia, where you can grow cannabis at under around 50 cents a gram, nobody in the U.S. can compete with that. There's a lot of margin allowed in that for import and export. And I think about countries right now, the big issue in Germany is that they're saying they're not going to allow import in their adult use program because they want to give German citizens an opportunity to start growing their own cannabis and having their own businesses in their own borders. But the reality is, at some point, economics are going to play a part in that. And there is already a trade channel between Colombia and Switzerland, because you can't really do anything cheaply in Switzerland. The cost of living is so high. So they're going to have to import products there. So I'm curious how you would address that, or what your thought process is on that.
I'm unveiling a product February 28th. Stay tuned.
Sure, you don't want to give us.
I am so
You don't want to give us.
excited.
You don't want to give us
AI.
a sneak peek.
It's real simple, guys. AI. This is not about labor. Like, if you're not watching the headlines, people are getting laid off left and right. This is not about labor. This is about automation of life. And people want consistency. If you can have a cannabis bud the size of your hand, would you want it? Yes, you would. And so the only way you get that is with AI. And so let's just be realistic about technology and agriculture. And it's coming to the cannabis and the psychedelic industry, and it's coming in a big wave. And, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have a seat at the table, so I see what's behind this wave, and it's going to be eye-opening for, I think, a lot of companies.
Yeah. And one more point on that, just to use the opioid industry as an example, in the United States, even with the import license, some people know this, some people don't know this. There were only 3 companies that actually control the entire import of all the opioids that is opium that is used to actually make opioids in the United States for the last almost 30 years. So as much of that import-export was a big conversation, there were only 3 allowed players. And think of how much the epidemic we have or the pandemic we actually have with opioids. I say that to sort of reconcile the fact that I am Nigerian. I'm Nigerian by birth, American by choice. So you think about the flow of medicines in terms of cost and that. We want to make sure that people in parts of the world that are much more challenged can access resources. And all those 3-letter, I talk about the 3-letter acronym organizations, worry about that. How do they buy this down? How do they talk about trades? But we are going to face a conversation that I think they've started talking about treaties. A lot of treaties are based on trade and policing drugs and this so-called drugs, and now we're talking about commerce around them. So it's going to be very interesting. We all have front seat rows to what's going to happen when Germany and the EU start talking. In March, the United Nations has called an emergency meeting on narcotics, because now, if Germany goes legal, if the US is talking about going federally legal, what's going to happen to the treaties that have dumped a lot of $1 billion to chasing people from Colombia about their, the import and export or illegal export of their resources that we've called drugs, right?
Well, and the prison industrial complex is
exactly
at risk, right?
So there's so many points to talk about that really hinge on that import-export phrase, whichever way. So time will tell. We'll see.
Yeah, and what is a new edition of the German market? Like, continue on that. What does that mean for Europe?
I think one word that comes to mind is disruption. I like it. And, my people, the Yoruba people of Southwest Nigeria, always say something, and it says, "Into Junwalu Junri." That means the eyes will only see what the eyes want to see. Some people are going to see opportunities. Some people are going to see problems. But
Can you repeat that line again?
Into Junwalu Junri, which means the eyes will see only what the eyes want to see.
You guys are going to get quizzed after this.
Exactly. So you're
You
getting
didn't know it was a language lesson as well.
There you go. There you go. So, to that point, Germany is a very interesting flag right now. Jamie and I talk about the first time we met. We had some interesting conversations because Zalera, while being an Australian company, we looked to Germany because we were able to take the clinical validation for the products we developed and piped through traditional trials. It made it very exciting for the German market. And the B-Farm, we went through the regulatory process and B-Farm approved it. Germany is going to shake up a lot of landscapes. The ground is going to have to shift in the EU because of what Germany does. Because then, as Jamie said, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the UK? What's going to happen to Switzerland? What's going to happen to the treaties that already exist between Switzerland and Colombia, or between Germany and Australia? So those types of things. I think Jamie can speak to that a little bit more.
New Holland Group is doing a lot of business in Germany. I speak fluent German, and part of the reason that I left Bang to do this is because the opportunities in the German-speaking countries in Europe specifically are so ripe right now, and I've been, in that market for so long. So part of the conversation around Germany is a multi-dimensional conversation, because we also want to talk about Portugal and Spain, where a lot of the growing is taking place in Europe. Malta has already legalized. There's growing happening there and in Macedonia. Macedonia is on track to become a full-fledged member of the EU. There's so many little moving parts. The war in Ukraine is playing a big role because the Russians control the gas that is powering most of Germany, and the Green Party is part of the ruling coalition in Germany, so they're not really excited about having cannabis grown in Germany because they don't want the energy draw, which makes me wonder about this AI thing and how that might play out in that on that side of the world. I also think where you have plentiful sunshine, like the Middle East, that might play a big role. And in Africa as well, there's a lot of conversation around having plentiful sunshine and access to natural resources that will allow cheaply produced cannabis to make its way back into Europe. But what we were talking about specifically is when the political landscape changes, because once Germany does pull that trigger, the Spaniards and the French are not going to want to have their dollars leaving their borders and their citizens going into Germany to buy cannabis. They're going to want to follow suit. So we're having conversations with all of those neighboring countries because they see the writing on the wall. But what's also happening that's interesting is the American politicians are very keen on knowing what's happening in Europe because they know that tail's going to wag the dog.
I just want to add two quick things to that. When I think of Germany, I think of engineering. You say Germany, I say engineering. So I think there's going to become a lot of great cannabis products that are engineered out of Germany. That's somewhere that I will keep my eyes, just letting you know. I think there's going to be some interesting stuff that comes out of there. And then on the Africa thing, I've spoke to 2 countries in Africa over the last couple weeks. Without question, it's going to happen there very quickly. And it's already happened, but they don't really have commercialization and a full path yet. So that's a place that you can go and do really good work. Right, you can go and do good work and build infrastructure.
Again,
it's a great point about the Germans engineering. The only really brief comment I want to make is they don't allow GMOs in their food. And the rules that they have in Germany to protect their citizens are so strict that it's going to be that way. And they are going to engineer better cannabis over there because they're going to have a stricter set of rules for what's allowed to be offered to their population. I mean, when I think about, we made an edible in 7 states, but we didn't have one Department of Health have to inspect a single kitchen because of the weird federal state. There were no federal rules, so the health departments didn't know what to do with us. That stuff isn't going to happen over there, and there's going to be standards set.
And what about Latin America? Do they represent significant potential, and also in what areas? Cultivation, genetics, brands, and so forth.
Latin America is great, and I think it's difficult because the U.S. keeps a very tight thumb on drug policy throughout Central and Latin America, and when you're really looking at Mexico and their stalled approach towards legalization of cannabis, it's a very challenging place. I think there's opportunity there. I just think that the U.S. government, until they provide clear oversight, we provide too much economic relief to those countries, and they walk very gingerly around cannabis. That's a tough space for me.
One comment in terms of just the whole world that I say to people is, again, back to that philosophy, the eyes will see what the eyes want to see. I'm going to use an example to kind of draw it. About 3 years ago, when we did the deal and became a publicly listed company in Australia, people said to us, there's no way you can get patent protection because the laws are not clear. And I said, oh, great. 36 months later, I'm sitting on a 41 patents granted in 26 countries with 143 in prosecution across Latin America. So I'm gathering as broad protections around technologies, around know-how, around trade secrets, because when the doors do open, right? So I think of the opportunity that is today a very loaded spring. And Latin America, Central America, Africa, 3 regions, and what we call NEMA. Yes, Asia is a sweet spot, and I'll speak on that in a second. NEMA, North Africa and the Middle East are very interesting. And why? Because they are less, we've not really set our eyes on them. So we have opportunities. Now, Asia is very, very powerful just by sheer numbers. So China used to allow us they would review and examine our patents applications very quickly. Now, they put out a notice, they're not even looking at it anymore. However, look at what's happening in the hemp space. A lot of hemp that is grown in different parts of the world are being bought up by Chinese companies. Somebody's got to ask, when you see bats during the day, the right question is not where are they coming from, is what's chasing them, right? So philosophically, we're seeing the movement of hemp material into Asia. We're seeing the Malaysian government has released their policy on CBD. South Korea is doing deals. The last Berlin conference, ICBC, I mean, look around the room. There were a significant number of Asian participants, more than we've seen. And the world knows, just by sheer numbers, when China gets into this space, it's going to pop.
Well, Thailand has been making groundbreaking strides also, but you brought up the point that I wanted to make for South America. I think the Trojan horse in South America is going to be hemp, because I see the hemp trade being an agricultural play, and it's less scary to the U.S. It's not about the drug trade. It's more about a cash crop, and they're growing hemp. There's hemp for animal feed, there's hemp for fiber, and then there's hemp for CBD. Hemp for CBD is a minuscule part of all the hemp that's being grown. And there's machinery that's been developed in Germany, engineered in Germany, imagine that, where they can actually decorticate the hemp stalk and they can use it to make paper and fiber. So right now, without having to retool a bunch of machinery, you can actually run hemp pulp through machines and make tampons and make wet wipes and make other types of fabric. And that is the Trojan horse play, because we all know what's happening with the expo hall right next door. You can have legal THC created out of hemp-derived laboratory situations. So, I mean, it's a slippery slope, and I don't think it's going to take very long for this whole thing to blow wide open worldwide.
I think it was solid.
Great. We're going to open up the floor.
Are we done?
Did you guys learn a lot so far? Right? We'll open up the floor for some Q&A, but I do want to. I'm going to steal your question. Earlier, he asked us, like, what's the most exciting thing that's happened to you recently? And I want everyone to kind of tell us, what is the most exciting thing that happened to you in 2022 with your company, and what is the most exciting thing that we can look forward to this year in 2023 for you guys?
Go for it.
In 2022, our company grew from our clinical operation. So we read out very positive results of our clinical trials from opioid sparing to diabetic nerve pain, and these are traditional clinical trials. We did that across both in Australia and in the US, and it's set up, we fully enrolled some more studies that really continue to drive the knowledge base for both science and drug development. In 2023, some of the catalysts that are exciting for us is one, participating in the international space. Oh, we got approved in Germany. I forgot to say that, which was a big deal, and expanded our footprints in those areas. What's very powerful is the capacity to improve the lives of more patients and to push the narrative around bringing cannabinoids as frontline therapy, not only down the lane, but as validated frontline therapies that in some cases will actually compete down some of the current pharmaceutical products. We have a philosophy at Zalira, which is when we know better, we must do better. This space has availed us the opportunity to not only know better, but kick some doors down and do better. So that remains exciting for us going into 2023. So yeah, very happy.
I spent 7 years at Bang and 3 years as the CEO. When Bang went public, I was not involved in that decision and ended up running a public company. Got I would say, an MBA trial by fire. I left in August, and that was bittersweet because I love the company and love the products, but I was excited to start the New Holland Group and really put my focus on the international world and bringing this magical plant and the healing that plant medicine brings to citizens and getting to choose who I do business with and how I do business, and I love that. So that was the best thing that happened to me last year. What I'm looking forward to this year is continuing to do the good work that I do.
Yeah, for me, 2022 was a year of rediscovery. It was finding our identity again, getting out of COVID, and also personally, I lost my mother-in-law, so that was challenging. Sorry, but real. Tough one, But the reality is, the challenges we had, it built us for 2023, which is the year of Jubilee. And I don't really like to look back. It's not productive in life unless you're using it to build yourself up. And so when I'm looking forward, what I see is nothing but opportunity. I think right now you can pick any segment of this market you want. It's not hard to find the people at the top, and you can do cool, amazing things and have a true impact on someone else's life. So, the true definition of a billionaire is someone who positively impacts 1 billion people. And with cannabis and psychedelics, we will frame that up where that is the new measure of life, because there's a lot of billionaires who suck and they're miserable. And there's a lot of poor people that are great and tons of fun. And the balance is really who's helping who more and who's having more fun doing it.
Amen.
Great. Thank you. With that, I'll open up the floor. Do we have any questions? We'll start on this side. Anyone have any? Yep.
You are all leaders in your companies and organizations, and you're already on that international spectrum. What advice could you give to those of us who are professionals in our own rights but that would like to join the international community in this endeavor?
Well, I think her question, for those of you who didn't hear it, she said, we're all leaders in our respective areas in working internationally. What advice would we give her for how to break into the international scene? I think you gave the answer, which is find the leaders that are doing it, LinkedIn, conferences, and select the area of what you're good at, and then just go do that with them. I know it sounds simplistic, but it actually, the thing I love about our industry is that everybody is so accessible.
Thank you for that. I consider myself a perpetual student of life, and that learning will get me more places. My dad would always say, when he was alive, that what you do is what is going to give you your breakthrough. So if you're an accountant, accountants are necessary in this same space, right? There's nothing like I'm a psychedelic expert or I'm a cannabis expert. It's a business, it's a business, it's a business. So if you are whatever it is that your hand is found to do and it's your line, and I think that's what's going to break you. I did not know anything about cannabis until I was 26. I never tried it as a child. I was one of those people. I went to apply for a different job in the cannabis industry, and I came away from that interview and they said, you're going to run the whole thing. I was handed $15 million to start as the founding chief operating officer for the company we built. And my approach was, this is business. And business, there's a right way and a best way to do it. So my advice for you is, what is it that you do? That's the same thing that is going to connect you. And you're going to find the people who need those services, connect with them, and you're going to provide that same service. I like to use accountants because people kind of think of just the agricultural part of cannabis. No, we need accountants. We need financial analysts, the same people. You're going to do those things. So whatever it is that you do, find that need or create that need, communicate that need to the industry. It is so ripe that everything that you do, you can do better in what you're already doing in the saturated world. You start to do it in cannabis, you become almost immediately productive and with real economics potentially behind it. So.
That's a great answer.
Um,
Right over here.
Oh, sorry. First of all, thank you guys for being here and speaking. And I really love the explanation of a billionaire. I'm going to use that one as well. I wanted to get your feedback or thoughts on, just today it was reported that Australia's Therapeutic Goods Authority has changed the scheduling for MDMA and psilocybin to make it Schedule 8, so they can now start to prescribe it. Just curious your thoughts on, is that going to have any impact internationally on other countries? Do you think this may lead to some, especially since you talked about Australia as a place of having some contacts, should we see some impact from this? And just some comments about it. Thank you. You want to start? Please.
I have major operations in Australia. I absolutely love Australia. It's a place that is absolutely magical in every sense of the word. It's America. Like when you're down there, it's awesome. And the cannabis use and psychedelic use and psilocybin use in Canada, in Australia, is prolific. And so there's a town in Australia called Nimbin. It's one of the cutest places you'll ever go in your life. They have a big cannabis festival there every year. And so I think the reality is we always go back to the laws. The laws are being followed by less and less people. And it's almost to the point where it's irrelevant at this point, no matter what country you're in. And I think now it's just, how do you build a business, organize people, and have a foundation where you can inspire people to have a better life, work together with you for a while, and then maybe they leave you and go do something better with themselves, or they stay with you forever, right? And I just think it really doesn't matter what country it is. And every time I see another country fall, I smile and I'm like, yes, we're one step closer to just people being happy. And at the same token, we're talking about living on Mars in the next 10 years, right? So like the fact that psychedelics aren't legal and cannabis isn't legal, but we're talking about inhabiting other planets, to me, just, it's very far out of alignment. And so I just think people are technologists by heart, and they find a way to get better on their own.
But I think as the dominoes fall from state legalization, we've got cities that are decrimming psychedelics, we've got countries that are legalizing psychedelics. People are getting emboldened to ask forgiveness rather than permission. And I think that's the point you're making, is that the laws are becoming guidelines. Because I think even in police states like New York, they just don't know what to do anymore because the stuff is so prolific. and it's just going to become more and more so.
One other thing I like about Australia is that, you know, we're always thinking about what is the best way, and I can quote my two colleagues here today who have just poured out a lot of knowledge. One of the things I want to say is sometimes maybe as Jamie said, maybe the next, whatever it is about cannabis and psychedelics is not going to come from the US. Australia right now offers 43.5% cash rebate for clinical work done. So when you see companies like ours saying we've planted our flag in Australia, it's because I can do research at the federal level. I can get 43.5% rebate on every dollar I spend in Australia. Australia is a springboard because it's a first world regulatory body. So the TGA is like the FDA, is like BfArM. So there are international guidelines of shared protocols and shared processes. So Australia for us then presents a very exciting opportunity where in the case of actually even clinically validating drugs in Australia, and those medicines being accepted by countries like Germany, by the UK. So you're starting to see, as I'm connecting the dots, why that's very exciting. Now that under the Special Access Program, psilocybin and other psychedelics and other drugs that come from, or components that come from natural compounds, physicians and prescribers can access them under the Special Access Program. We will see other countries. New Zealand is going to respond. The EU is going to respond because they trust the types of data that comes out of a country like Australia because they're credible.
A couple more questions? I don't know who has the mic. Lights are pretty bright, right? Does anybody else have any more questions? Okay, right over here. You guys have the mic? Give me 1 sec.
Hi, everyone. Pardon if this is something that you guys mentioned already. I stepped in a few minutes late. But I hear that you guys are talking a lot about different regions, across the world that are participating in this industry and this niche. And I haven't heard anyone talk about the Caribbean or Jamaica specifically. And I'm disappointed because of the branding that Jamaica has done or experienced as it relates to cannabis. And I'm just wondering, do you all know anything about where they stand on that in this international landscape and in growing the industry forward?
I worked with Minister Audrey Shaw back in the day to craft the Emancipation Plan in Jamaica. And the vision was there was a tremendous amount of sugarcane fields that had been abandoned because as sugarcane evolved, the farming of it, you moved from manual harvest to a mechanical harvest. And they didn't do that because they wanted to keep people employed. And so we went to Jamaica and outlined a plan to start to convert those assets into hemp fields and cannabis fields. The challenge is that there's no export in Jamaica. Or there's no, they want export, but nobody really wants import. And so, again, it's a country where you can grow it inexpensively. It's got an incredible climate, but the export market doesn't exist. And internally, it's very difficult to set up a regulated market in Jamaica and sell. It's embedded in the culture, and you can get cannabis everywhere. So, I've tried in Jamaica. Some challenges in Jamaica. They have one of the highest diabetes populations because there's a lot of poverty. So a lot of the children are eating rice and sugar all day. And so by the time they're 18, they have about a 28% chance of having diabetes. And one of the things that we had proposed was switching that rice out for hemp porridge, so the kids were eating, a healthier thing in their upbringing, and to try to save the Department of Health money long term by investing in the ag program. So it's not that there's not efforts happening. I just think it's, it's a poor country that it's hard to get traction in.
Douglas Gordon's in the audience right now, who puts on Canex Jamaica. I spoke at Canex Jamaica this year, but I would defer that question to him because nobody in this room probably knows better about Jamaica specifically than Doug. And then on top of that, I've got some clients that are doing work in Barbados. The Caribbean's interesting from my perspective because you have a mix of islands that are sovereign and islands that are not sovereign, and then you have the UK sort of lording over the ones that aren't, and the UK is very clear. So then you've got this disparate ability to do business there. And to your point, when I was there at Canex, everywhere I went, I was offered cannabis. Cannabis, cannabis, cannabis. Well, you know how difficult it is to establish a legal market in an area where cannabis is ubiquitous. So what do you do with the market that currently exists? Because really all you would have is the tourism if you're not doing export in that particular country. But if somebody wants to hand Douglas the microphone, I'd love to hear what you have to say about the opportunities in...
Doug, I also have a seat
Sorry
right
if I'm
here
putting you
next
on the
to me.
spot,
I'm
but...
just kidding.
But we have an expert in the room. Let's tap it.
Right there.
Hey, Jamie. Expert might be a bit strong, but the Jamaican, and so I'll respectfully disagree with you on a couple points. The Jamaican opportunity, first of all, we all think everybody in Jamaica is open to cannabis, and it's not the truth, right? The installed base of Jamaican population is they've grown up with this as a bad thing. These are of guys on the fringes of society who are not productive or who engage in cannabis in Jamaica. The big thing that's missing in Jamaica, in my opinion, is that there's not the degree of education within the country about the medicinal benefits of cannabis. So you have older population who this has been bad, this is sort of a stain on the Jamaican honest business person's career, that has not been properly addressed to show them the benefits. When that happens, I think you'll have a lot more people coming into the market locally, willing to try the product and willing to try cannabis, but they would only buy from a dispensary. They'd buy from somewhere that's now reputable, that they can have a different degree of trust in. The other challenging failure that has not been yet rectified is within the market, you do not have, they have this licensed thing, which is the medicinal pathway, and then you have all the sacramental and the Rastafarian and the cultural that have been sort of left out. So you have this challenge in Jamaica right now where those two things are not properly reconciled, and you don't have the respect on both sides for which the other is doing. And that will change, I believe, in short order, but until that happens, you're going to have this, it's just this disunity is what I call it.
Yeah, I call it the roots and the suits. And I didn't coin it, but in the US we have it too. We have the roots who've been there, they hid from helicopters, they made sure that they had cannabis. Guys like my dad, who's been growing 56 years on the DL because he could have gone to jail, and he was a businessman, but he had PTSD and he didn't like alcohol. Cannabis made him feel better. He's a root. I'm not a root, I'm a suit. I grew up with my dad, but it wouldn't make me that. And you have that with the Rastafarians and the cash grab suits coming in to have a business. There's always that kind of push-pull, and what we have to have is both the roots and the suits working together. And I think the suits that are coming in are starting to understand that the roots have a ton of knowledge that they can lean on. And then what the roots are starting to figure out is that the suits that are here are a little bit edgy. They're giving up cushy jobs to come in and blaze trails in cannabis. And there's always a story behind that, because you don't give up a cushy job unless there's a story behind it. We have seen some suits come in and get their butts handed to them, and some of them are gone now. But I think the majority of the suits that have come in have come in with good intentions and have a story behind cannabis. And I think in the Jamaican opportunity, we're seeing that's just some of the dust that's going to need to settle in all of the opportunity that exists in all of the markets, because we're breaking something brand new in through the stigma that has been very powerful.
Perfect.
The one thing I'd like
Perfect.
to add as well, Jamie, because it was said before, is Jamaica, unlike almost all other territories, has something that differentiates it, where we have this race to the bottom in the commoditization of cannabis, and that is Jamaican flower is a finished product.
Cool.
And I think what's been missing from the Jamaica ganja story is really standing behind that and embracing that and putting that on the global market to say, we can be a premium niche product, and that's all that we are in this space.
I think we need a Caribbean panel next year. Just a Caribbean. Thank you so much for being with us today. Once again, give it up for Jamie Pearson, also for Dr. O and Garen Angel. Really insightful panel. Did you guys enjoy yourselves? There will be a fireside chat happening in a couple of minutes, so stay around for that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Great work, everybody, as always. Nancy Whiteman, if you're in the house, it's time to rock and roll. I just had a lovely interview with Nancy. Fantastic speaker. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with her. Yeah, all this talk about artificial intelligence shaping the cannabis and psychedelics industry. I still like to get high the old-fashioned way, you know what I'm saying? If anybody's got a plug on that Jetsons weed, though, I'm listening. All right. Also, I'd recognize that voice anywhere. Good to see you, Douglas K. Gordon, in the house. All right, so, yes, I'm Dennis Walker. I'm emceeing. Around through every panel, absorbing tons of information. A lot of fun, and we're just getting started, just starting to get the ball rolling here. I also want to reiterate that tonight we're going to be having an Entheo Awards Gala event here in this ballroom. We've got a couple of people receiving awards. You might have heard of a few of them. I'll save that for a little bit later. Yeah, right on. It's cool. While they were talking, I saw the Mycopreneur podcast and the logo right there, and it was kind of a high water mark for me. I felt really good. So that's my podcast. Shout out Mycopreneur. Thank you all for hanging out with me and for attending Canadelic. Let's get this show on the road. We've got Amanda Siebert, is that right? Yeah, Nancy Whiteman. Here, have a mic. You got one already. Cool.
Amanda, I'm going to just get next to a table so I can put my water down. Thank you. Wow, those lights are bright.
Oh, they really are. Hi, everyone. How's it going? Enjoying your afternoon? Are you tired of seeing my face? I think this is probably the third time I'm up here today. I'm really excited to be talking to Nancy today. This is Nancy Whiteman from Wana Brands. We're going to be having a really lovely discussion. So before we get into it, I'm going to introduce Nancy in a more formal way, let you know a little bit about what she does and what she has done. She's been heralded as the Queen of Legal Weed by Inc. She's also been named the Martha Stewart of Edibles by Entrepreneur. Nancy Whiteman is a co-founder and CEO of Wana Brands, which is a top international brand already available in more than 300 dispensaries across the US and Canada. Nancy has also established the Wana Brands Foundation, which is an organization that works to enhance the world by supporting a wide variety of nonprofits in Wana's communities. She also leads Wana Brands' strategic vision and has been instrumental in the company's growth into new and emerging markets. And she serves on the Marijuana Business Daily Advisory Board and the Benzinga Cannabis Advisory Board. She's also been recognized for numerous awards, including Forbes' Most Influential People in Cannabis in April 2022, High Times Top 100 in April 22 as well, Green Market Report's first ever Woman Leadership Award for a leading brand, also in April 2022. Very interesting. It's a good month for you.
It was a very good month.
And Denver Business Journal's Outstanding Woman in Business. Thank you so much for being here, Nancy. So let's dive into Wana Brands. Actually, you know what? First, I want to talk a little bit about you. How did you get into the cannabis industry? How did you find yourself on this path?
Well, first of all, I have to make one minor correction.
Yes, please.
So we are actually in over 3,000 dispensaries.
Did I say 300?
You said 300.
I'm sorry. It says 3,000. I meant to say 3,000.
But thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm sorry to start out with a minor correction. Yeah, I think if any of you have ever had the experience of hearing me speak before and hearing me answer this question, I have sort of an ongoing joke about myself, which is I always say that I need a better backstory. And what I mean by that is that there are so many people who entered the cannabis industry for very inspiring reasons. Either they had a loved one who was helped by cannabis or a personal story themselves, or they got in for social justice, and I'm in great awe and admiration of all of them, and I got nothing. So I'm going to tell you what actually happened with me, which is that my daughter was having a play date with a neighbor, and her dad came over to pick her up. And he was in commercial real estate, which was a really terrible industry in Colorado in 2010. And so I said, sort of just casually, so what are you doing these days? And he said to me, oh, you wouldn't approve. And of course, whose interest would not be piqued by that, right? So I said, so, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, I started an infused soda pop company. And though I was no stranger to cannabis recreationally, I actually didn't know much about it medicinally at all. And so I asked the dumb question, what is it infused with? And he said it's infused with marijuana, which is what we used to call cannabis in 2010, right? So long story short, we ended up building out a kitchen with him. He already had sort of a rudimentary little setup going. And that was a very short-lived partnership, as many of those early cannabis partnerships were. And so he got out of the business rather quickly, but we kind of kept going. But what ending up being more interesting about my story is not that, I got into it opportunistically, because I did, but that I had this huge awakening when I realized how much our products were helping people. I started getting feedback from our end users and people telling me just incredible stories about what being able to use cannabis legally had meant to them from a health and wellness perspective. And from that point on, I was, drawn to cannabis and really wanting to uncover and understand the power of the plant. And I have to laugh when I look back, it's been 13 years, it'll be 13 years this summer since we started WANA. And what passed for revolutionary back then in terms of effects, and we were one of the first companies to have indica, sativa, and hybrid, and like, whoa, that seemed pretty revolutionary. And then we moved to adding CBD ratios, and that was really pretty exciting too after the Farm Bill was passed. And then, of course, CBD, that was the only cannabinoid we really knew about at that point other than THC. And now I look at our products, and they're so highly formulated and so much more sophisticated with a range of minor cannabinoids, with proprietary terpene blends that are powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning, with functional ingredients and coactives, things that are really crafted to deliver very precise experiences for people, and that are really guided by as much science as we can. One of my personal pet peeves is when people come out with products and they list all of the things they've put, it's got ashwagandha and it's got this and it's got that, and you look at the amount of the ingredient that's in it, and it's so far away from being a functional dose that it's really just a joke, right? So we don't do stuff like that. But really, our mission really is about creating the most effective products so that people can have the customized experience that they want to have, or that it can address the health and wellness issue that they're trying to address. And that's really our reason for being.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I don't think you have to change your story. I like your story. I think
Okay.
it's got substance. It's good.
It gets better as it goes along, frankly.
Awesome. You've touched on a few really important points here about WANA, about things that separate it. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more. What makes WANA stand out from other brands in the market? I've had the opportunity to interview a few folks who are associated with WANA, who use WANA, athletes who are very keen on your products. Tell me about some of those initiatives that you guys are working on.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, again, going back to 2010. And so Juana is based in Colorado, and now we're in 15 states and Puerto Rico and 9 markets in Canada and more to come this year. But we started out in Colorado, and Colorado back in 2010 was kind of the Wild West. There was no regulations about third-party testing for potency. There were no requirements about what solvents or pesticides could be used. There were, how people used to describe their potency 1x, 2x, or 3x. And you could figure out for yourself how potent that was. But really, right from the start, I had just an absolute commitment to, I never wanted anybody to take a Juana product and not have any idea what their experience was going to be. So from our very first batch of product, we third-party lab tested our products. And so even right from the get-go, Juana had a reputation for consistency, that when you took a Juana product, you knew what your experience was going to be, and no surprises, good or bad, about that. So we've having this real drive towards consistency. And the other thing that I would say is that we have a real drive towards innovation, and a lot of the things that I was just talking about, which is that we're constantly evolving our product, and we're constantly scouring the industry for what is the latest technology and how can we use that technology to create better and more effective products. There's a lot of, particularly these past 2 years, which have been really tough years for the industry, there's a lot of edibles brands out there that really are racing to the bottom, to be honest with you. And, when you look at the big picture of business, there's a lot of different ways that one can compete, right? You can try to be a low-cost leader. And, that strategy, to be honest with you, depends on scale, right? You can't make any money being a low-cost leader if you can't scale because you're working on tiny little margins. Well, it's very difficult to scale in cannabis because you have to start over in every single market you go into. So that's not really a viable strategy if what you're trying to do is ultimately make money. And so our strategy, which is really driven by our passion for the plant, is to be a premium product, a premium effective product. And so that's what we focus on. Our products are based on as much good science, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the foundation and some of our initiatives there. But we're believers in science, and we're believers that at the end of the day, despite what we're seeing right now in terms of price compression, that there's going to be a market for people who really want the best products that they can have and the best experience they can have.
Thank you. I remember around that time, like 2010, 2011, 2012, cannabis was still illegal in Canada, but there were a lot of legacy brands that were copying Juana, that were doing the ratios of tea. So it was really neat to sort of see that appear north of the border. You mentioned something, just now, price compression, things going on in the cannabis space. The industry has really been going through a lot of turmoil. Can you give me a quick overview on your take on the space right now?
Sure, absolutely. I think everybody knows it's been a pretty tumultuous time for the last year or so in the industry. I would probably put what's happening in the industry into several different buckets. And bucket number one, I would call sort of macroeconomics, right? The economy is struggling. People are tighter with their dollars. They're either using cannabis less or they're looking for lower cost products. But another piece of that, actually interesting, a piece of it is COVID. Because during COVID, Juana, like many companies, I think, we probably experienced 2 or 3 years of growth in 1 year. Because people were home, they had some extra disposable income because they weren't going out and doing stuff, and because the government was subsidizing a lot of the benefits that people were using. And so we had explosive growth, as did not everybody, but several other companies, I'd say, too. And, the way the human brain works, we think, well, this will last forever. I don't know why we never seem to learn that lesson. But the fact is that a lot of people scaled up as if that level of growth was going to be what was going to be the norm going forward. And in fact, once the world opened back up again and people had other choices and government money dried up, that level of growth did not sustain. So that meant that what companies did in a lot of cases was that they overbuilt, that there was more capacity in the system. Now, that's sort of on the macroeconomic side of things. Then I have a whole bucket of issues that I'm going to lump under regulatory. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things there. First of all, as we know, every state has very, very different programs, and because of that, they tend to have very different kinds of problems. So you have some states that have, for example, really opened up their grow capacity. Michigan, perfect example of this one. We've seen enormous price compressions, just simply supply and demand. There's just a lot of cannabis available. California has been going through the same thing for many years. We're seeing a little bit of stabilization now, but just oversupply, and that's regulatorily driven. But the other issue is a taxation issue. So we're not a piggy bank. The industry's not a piggy bank. You can't endlessly tax the industry and expect it to be able to compete with the illicit market. You've got a situation in New York right now where we only have, of course, 2 adult use dispensaries open after 2 years. But, you know, the estimates are that the legal market is probably going to cost twice as much as a same dosage product for the illegal market in New York because of taxation. So then you couple that with lack of enforcement. So we have 2 dispensaries open in New York. We have literally thousands of illegal places to buy cannabis in New York at this point in time with almost no enforcement. So when you start adding these things up together, you start to see what a stressor this is on the industry. And then finally, we have just plain old-fashioned, not great business practices, right? We have a lot of companies that assumed that capital was going to be accessible to them forever. They focused on top-line growth. They weren't watching the bottom line. They always figured they could grow their way out of any problems. And then for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that we've had no movement in terms of federal legalization. We can't even get safe banking through. The capital markets have dried up. Cannabis stocks are trading at all-time lows for many companies, or close to all-time lows. And so companies that never had a pathway to profitability now suddenly find themselves in a very, very difficult situation. About a year or so ago, we started to see a shift in funding from equity to debt. And I do not consider myself to be any kind of a financial genius, but I was looking at some of these deals thinking, let me see if I understand this. This is a company that isn't making any money, that now just took out $150 million in debt, and now they have to service that debt, okay? That doesn't look like a good situation to me. And sure enough, now we're starting to see lots of people defaulting on debt. So there's a whole range of challenges that are going on in the cannabis industry right now.
So let's see if I got all those. You mentioned macroeconomics, you mentioned the up and down of COVID, bad business practices. With all of this stuff going on, what keeps you going? And why are you still excited to be in this space?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I have to say that despite the very gloomy picture that I just painted, some of this is just normal stuff that happens in new industries, right? People overexpand, there's consolidation, there's retraction. You name a brand new industry and you will see the same pattern. So some of it is just a point in time issue because we're new and we're learning and we've got a whole bunch of headwinds. But really, the truth is, if you look, the future is still quite bright for cannabis. There's new markets opening up all the time. There is new products and new technology coming out. And the thing that actually keeps me going is the excitement of what we keep learning every day about the power of this plant and what we at WANA can do to make our products better and more effective for our customers and the people who depend on us to enhance their lives, as we say. That's our tagline. So that's what keeps me going.
Thank you. Yes, speaking to the hope of cannabis, that's really important. It's also a really nice segue into my next question. So you recently made a gift to the Johns Hopkins Cannabis Lab to help fund their research on cannabis. What made you decide to do that? And do you know what that research will be focusing on?
So let me back up a little bit and
Sure.
talk about where that donation came from. So a year ago, this past October, so about a year and a half ago now, Canopy Growth Corporation of Canada essentially purchased an option to purchase WANA. And, WANA was kind of the original little bootstrapped company. I never took any debt, never took any equity, grew the company completely organically. And so this was a transaction that had, thank you.
Applause for that. That's not easy to do.
Thank you. So this was a transaction that, needless to say, had a pretty transformative effect on my personal finances. And I knew immediately that I was going to want to create a foundation and to give back. And I named it the WANA Brands Foundation in honor of where the money came from, of course. Really, the foundation in many ways was an extension of a lot of the corporate social responsibility priorities that we had had as a company, but at a much larger level than I could have been able to do before. And there's, a whole variety of things that I can talk about that the foundation funds. But something that was extremely important to me was to be part of furthering knowledge in cannabis. And so that is how the gift to Johns Hopkins, it's a $2 million gift to their cannabis lab and $1 million gift to their psychedelics lab, which I'll be talking about that in a little bit more in a moment. And, it's so important that that people who have the means to do this provide funding, because we're so behind, frankly, because we've had decades of prohibition against people doing real research, right? And it's the real research institutions, by the way, Johns Hopkins, both of those labs are DEA-approved labs, which means they can do human research. They can do it at a level that a physician could take a look at a study and say, I understand how this is useful. But they are really doing the kind of foundational research that is going to unlock the power of the plant. As we talked about, there's over 400 cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, and other plant compounds, and we know tiny amounts of what these plant compounds do, how they interact with each other, and how to best use them to solve a lot of different issues. So their cannabis lab does a variety of different research. This was, by the way, an unrestricted gift to them. And I mentioned that because when you think about where the money actually usually comes from, it usually comes from government agencies like NIH, who have agendas for what they want that money used for, right? And so to have a chunk of money made available to you to say, you are the scientists and you are the clinicians who are seeing patients all the time, and we look to you to help us understand what are the most important things that we could possibly be doing to add to the body of knowledge of cannabis. So it's a range of different things, everything from autism studies to studies about anxiety and just many, many different types of things that they're looking at.
Wow, well, thank you. I look forward to seeing what comes out of Johns Hopkins on cannabis in the coming years. You also mentioned a donation to the JHU Psychedelics Lab.
Yes.
What drove that decision? Do you have a personal interest in psychedelics?
I do.
Okay.
So interestingly, the psychedelics lab and the cannabis lab are in the exact same building, one floor apart. So it was a very interesting opportunity because I got to actually go visit them and meet with some of the key people on their teams. But, my own opinion on philanthropy in general is that really philanthropy, I think, in many, many instances, and certainly in this one, comes out of what touches our hearts the most, right? What is the most meaningful to us personally? Where do we want to have impact in the world? And I think probably like many of you in this room have had loved ones who've been touched by mental health issues and addiction issues. And that's really, one of the things that interested me and why I'm here today about psychedelics is because I think good mental health is at the root of everything. And the epidemic of mental health problems and addiction problems that we have in this country, just on a dollar and cents level, is costing us literally billions of dollars, but it's also literally costing us incredible pain and suffering. And for me, psychedelics and the promise of psychedelics, whether it's used for spiritual connection, whether it's used ritualistically, some of the indigenous uses of it, or whether it's used therapeutically to address mental health issues, represents the brave new world in terms of treatment for things that have proved to be pretty intractable. And most of the medications and options that we have out there are not working very well. So if I have an opportunity to contribute to the world, this is just something that's personally really, really meaningful to me.
Thanks, Nancy. Do you have any idea at this point what that money will be used for on the psychedelic side?
They are doing a variety of research. Some of it, I think, is related to depression. Some of it's related to anxiety. They've done some research around people who do have substance issues. So again, what we wanted to do was to give an unrestricted gift so that there's no agenda. There's no, let's prove that this is harmful, or, it really is, to be used as they understand it and to see fit. And part of the reason that I'm really here today is that I am not an expert on this, and I've learned so much. And it's not that I think that I'm ever going to have enough knowledge to guide them, but at least to have intelligence discussions about where I see opportunity and what I think would be interested to pursue.
Awesome. I want to ask you a little bit about cannabis and psychedelics and comparing the two. So having been in the cannabis space since almost the beginning and now watching the evolution of the psychedelics industry, how would you compare them? Do you see any similarities, some glaring differences?
I see more glaring differences than actually I would honestly say that I see similarities.
Probably one of the first people to say that. A lot of people like to say they're so similar, but
I don't think they're similar at all, frankly. First of all, one of the things that's been an enormous surprise to me is how quickly the mainstreaming of psychedelics is taking place compared to what I witnessed with cannabis. When I first started in cannabis, I had school-age children at home, and boy, did I not talk about what I did. I thought, nobody's going to have play dates with my kids anymore, right? But, there really was a stigma. And we've come in a tremendously long way in the last 13 years. But when I see how quickly things are evolving with psychedelics, I'm actually quite stunned by the difference between the two industries. And I also think that just structurally, they're completely different from each other. When you think about cannabis, there's essentially, on the plant-touching side of it, there's three very distinctive things. You can cultivate, you can be a manufacturer processor, or you can be a retailer, or you can be all three, right? Or some combination thereof, right? That kind of sums it up in terms of plant-touching businesses. And then there's a lot of interesting ancillary stuff. There's a lot of tech. There's a lot of, support services around it. But there's three pretty distinct different business models in cannabis. I have been looking at and watching the psychedelic space and the business models in the psychedelic space, and man, they are all over the board. They are all over the board. You have things, you've got ketamine clinics, you've got Rick Doblin spoke earlier about the fascinating work that they're doing with MDMA through MAPS. You have people who are trying to figure out how do we get the benefits of psychedelics without having the psychedelic experience. You have completely different business models. And right now, the truth is, I think it's kind of, I joke that we're an industry of magpies, that we're going after the shiny new thing all the time, right? And right now, to a certain degree, I think a lot of what's happening in psychedelics is it's the shiny new thing. And the truth is, we don't really know how most of these are going to work out. But the other big difference that I would say in terms of how these markets are going to develop is just, logical, right? So cannabis, although generally I'm not a big fan of comparing it to alcohol because I think they're very, very, very different from each other, but they're similar in this way, that you have many people who use alcohol and cannabis on a daily basis. It doesn't have any particular negative impact on their life. They enjoy it, they're able to use it. It's a high frequency and relatively low toxicity, of course, depending on how much you use of it, option for people for relaxation. So it lends itself really easily to a dispensary-like model where there's a high frequency of people coming in and the product turns over. We might get there someday with microdosing, but we're really far from that. There's not a lot of good research that I'm aware of yet, but if you know of it, I'd like to hear about it, on microdosing. And certainly when you get into a macrodosing type situation, it's either being used, it is being used recreational. Obviously, people do use it recreationally, but they're not like waking up in the morning and saying, I think I'll, consume 3 grams of psilocybin mushrooms this morning and then go to work. It's not a regular frequency kind of a product. And in the foreseeable future, as we talk about it as a legal product, I think it's mostly going to take place in the context of a medical or a therapeutic setting. So I think they're two extremely different situations and industries.
Thank you for that perspective. I really appreciate that. What do you think about the two industries in terms of investment? You talked about, some of these cannabis companies being at their all-time lowest stock price. We've seen a lot of hype, on both sides, a lot of ups and downs, and frankly, if I may be so bold, a lot of over-promising and under-delivering from a few players. Do these industries have something different to offer investors at this point?
Yes, I think they do. First of all, I think the cannabis stocks have been so beaten down at this point that I think if you're a long-term investor and you are careful about the companies that you invest in and you understand the components of what's likely to happen. I was sorry I wasn't able to listen to the whole international panel that came before, but you have to begin thinking about cannabis globally, right? What happens if you have built out grows in 23 states and then all of a sudden Colombia can produce it at a tiny fraction of the cost, right? You're going to have to begin thinking about it globally. But there's no doubt that there's a huge amount of growth left in cannabis, and there are going to be companies that are going to be successful. And so if you have the stomach for it and if you feel like holding on, there's a lot of probably good buying opportunities right now in cannabis. I would say that right now, the investors in the psilocybin space are people with very high tolerance for risk. I think many of these are what I consider to be binary investments. They're either going to do very well or they're going to go to zero. Right? So I think the more discerning an investor is and the more they take the time to understand the business model and really what it's going to take. I think a lot of it is going to look more pharma-like, which it takes more capital and it has a certain percentage of things that make it through and a certain percentage of things that don't make it through. So I think it's a different investor. I think it's a different tolerance. And I think there are going to be a lot of companies that are promising a lot of things that probably will not come to fruition.
Unfortunately. So let's flip the coin. Let's talk about some good things. Looking ahead, what do you envision for WANA specifically and cannabis more generally?
Well, for WANA specifically, I think I remain excited about the same things that I was talking about before, which is that, with each passing year and with the relationships that we have built with researchers and technology companies, we have the ability to make our products better and more targeted and more precise. And that's really what I get excited about. I think, there's companies out there that their whole model is like, I go into a market and I offer BOGOs and I offer promotions and I offer discounts and I offer bud tender incentives and I get all this market share. Honestly, if that was what I had to think about every morning when I opened up my eyes, I would not go to work. That is not interesting to me. It's not exciting to me. It's one of the most boring things I can imagine spending your time doing. To me, the real future for WANA is innovation and how we educate people, how we help people improve the quality of their life, how we enhance their lives by creating better and more effective products. So that's my WANA answer. For cannabis in general, I think that there will be, for every WANA, there's probably going to be 10 companies who think that they're going to make it in a low-cost model, that they're going to race to the bottom, that they're going to grab all the market share because their product is the cheapest on the market. And everybody gets this is America. We all get to compete the way we want to compete, right? So, I think that as markets and industries mature, you do see things shake out into different niches and different parts of the market, and that's how business strategies are built.
Thanks, Nancy. One last question for you before we open it up to questions from the audience. Now, what's been the most surprising element of this industry for you, considering both the historical and the present-day narrative around cannabis in America? Did you think that you'd see this profound shift around cannabis and drugs in general in your lifetime?
Definitely not. I was raised in the Nancy Reagan, just say no era. And even as I said, like 13 years ago, I was very reluctant to talk with people about what I did. And so the growing acceptance, and I'm always watching the surveys of, the percentage of voters who support medical cannabis and the percentage of voters who support full legalization. And to watch how that has changed over the last 13 years has probably been the most surprising thing to me because, we have a joke in cannabis that every year feels like a dog year. So I've actually been, if that's true, I've been in cannabis a really, really long time. But the truth is 13 years is a really short time to change attitudes as much as attitudes have changed. And I feel that the mainstreaming of cannabis has laid the groundwork and the foundation for quicker adoption and openness to psychedelics as well.
That's really well put. In fact, when I was on stage earlier, I was here with Los Arias, and he said basically the same thing in different words, that cannabis is like the tip of the spear for these other medicines and psychedelics. So thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the audience for Nancy?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Could you maybe try that one more time? You know what? We're going to make different mistakes. It's what I would say. We're going to make different mistakes because the nature of the two industries are very, very different. What I hope we don't do is that we don't keep deliberately building business models that don't have a pathway to profitability, right? That's what I hope we don't do. Now, and I do understand that in particular pharma being a great example, you know, there's no guarantee that something's going to get through FDA approval and all the rest of that. But I am sitting here as living proof that you can build a highly profitable business without taking on debt, without taking on equity. It is possible to do it. And so I hope that that's a lesson that people take away.
Anyone else with a question? Sure, in the front row.
Hi. How would you build your business model now in 2023? Is this on?
Just a little bit louder, or is it on?
How would you build your business model now in 2023?
The question is, how would you build your business model now versus 13 years ago? Would you change anything? Is that right? Yeah.
You know something, that's actually a really interesting question, and I don't know that I would change the fundamentals. Some of the specifics, if I could go back and wave a magic wand, I surely would. But we chose an asset-light model, and what I mean by that is our only manufacturing facility is actually in Colorado. In the rest of our markets, we partner with people who are license holders, and they produce our products for them. Now, what I would change is, would I have partnered with every single one of the people that I partnered with? No. But I actually think that the model itself, hey, there's no easy way to do this. There's no easy way to expand. My model is asset light, and it allowed us to grow without a lot of capital. It also comes with its own set of problems. Managing 15 sets of partners is not an easy thing to do. But on the whole, I think that I'm still, I'm A, satisfied with how we expanded, but B, I'm satisfied with the overall positioning that we chose, which is that we wanted to be a premium, highly effective product.
Another hand.
You haven't really spoken to what you'd like to see federally. If you have a crystal ball, first of all, what would you like to see federally? And secondly, what do you expect to see?
Oh dear. Okay. I do not have a crystal ball. Darn. I do think that we are ultimately headed for full legalization. Do I think that's going to happen anytime very soon? I do not, unfortunately. I think the best that we can hope for in the short run is that we get Safe Banking or Safe Banking Plus passed. I think that would enormously help the capital situation. It certainly would open up the industry to institutional investors who are by and large staying away. And that's part of the lumpiness of the stock market, is that we have a lot of retail investors who don't have sort of a long-term perspective on it. So yes, I do believe that legalization will occur. No, I don't think it's going to be anytime super soon.
Yeah, I'm curious. I would like to dig a little deeper into that federal policy piece. I've worked in both the hemp and cannabis space, mostly hemp for a number of years, especially on the policy side. And seeing how we worked to get the Farm Bill passed and how that played out with FDA and this announcement that they've just made, which, I have to say, I think is really outrageous that they're now saying that they need new authority and they're using CBD/hemp, whatever, as their excuse for doing that when it's just another botanical. But I'm curious, it seems like the cannabis industry doesn't seem to be taking a lesson from what's happening with hemp and looking down the line with regards to what federal legalization would really look like and how it would be regulated. I can't really see how the FDA can have a role in regulating a smokable flower, for example. I'm just curious what your take is on how this might be regulated, or have you given any thought to that?
Does anybody have a soapbox? Because I would like to get on it. Um, where to begin on this one? Yeah, I think, I think about the FDA piece of it all the time as it relates to cannabis. And I think we do what we can do right now to get ready for that. And that means that we, have a production facility that is as close to GMP as it can be. I look for partners who are building their facilities to those levels. But the truth is, when the FDA gets involved, there's going to be some unintended consequences that are going to probably be difficult to manage our way through. I would like to say something. Here's where the soapbox part starts, is that I think that we have an opportunity with the 5-year review of the Farm Bill this year to close a very dangerous loophole that has been created that has led to the proliferation of synthetically produced intoxicating hemp products, specifically D8. It is dangerous. It's made with dangerous solvents. It is sold in environments that are not age-gated. It has no requirements for lab testing for potency or for child-resistant packaging or any of the other things that we've come to expect with cannabis, and it's not being taxed. Children can get their hands on it very, very easily. It's an absolute enormous loophole that needs to be closed at the federal level. So we can look to the Farm Bill, we can say, oh, look at that, that's wonderful. We got hemp legalized federally, but yet there were some things that were horrendously mismanaged with it.
Hi, I'm a cannabis nurse and I work with patients. And I have to say, of all the gummy companies in Maryland that we have, and we have a lot of them, Wana is the best one. I'm so amazed at the way you don't care about your, just keeping that THC content high. You work towards bettering your products, coming out with solventless rosin products, and improving upon the patient experience. My question to you is, with legalization gaining traction, what consequences do you see happening to the medical market as a result, as far as having the products that we need, like you produce, for our patients with the ratio medicine? A lot of my dispensaries, and I take care of quite a few in Maryland, aren't even carrying anything above a 1-to-1. You know what I mean? As far as CBD and full spectrum.
I do. Yes. First of all, thank you for your kind comments about Wana. Really appreciate that. That has been, we have continued to innovate and bring out new products in the medical market, particularly high potency products, because our medical patients require that. Unfortunately, what is happening as adult use is happening in more and more states, is that the medical market is naturally beginning to shrink as people decide that they don't want to pay for the cost of the medical card. We could have debates all day about they'll make that up in terms of lower taxes and the economies of scale of buying higher dosage products. But, the medical market is going to depend on people continuing to understand the value of having that medical card. And companies, fortunately or unfortunately, respond to size of market and size of revenue opportunity. So part of it has to be a commitment on the part of the companies to continue to meet the needs of medical patients. And part of it needs to be that medical patients need to continue to support and push for strong medical programs in their states.
Hi. You're definitely an inspiration. This is really cool. Only about 20% of cannabis businesses are owned by women. So it's really awesome to see someone who broke through the glass ceiling, if you will. So thank you for that. Very cool. But I was wondering if you have had any kind of roadblocks and hurdles along the way that you feel like maybe you had to face being a woman versus a lot of men wouldn't have to necessarily face. So I was curious, if you could elaborate on that, how you have really risen to the top being a badass woman in Canada. So,
Thank you so much. I think that, well, first of all, my background was two very male-dominated industries prior to cannabis, which was financial services and technology. So, and I also only have brothers, and I had a very dominant father. So this was sort of unfortunately kind of normal for me. But one thing that I would say is that where I think women tend to have the most disadvantage, which was not an issue for me, is when they go to raise money, right? The statistics on the number of women who get funding compared to men with equivalent or lesser credentials than the women who are trying to get money is really quite disheartening. So I didn't have that particular problem because I didn't go out looking for money. And then by the time I got to a position where I was actually ready to sell the company, I had a highly profitable company, right? So I had a number of advantages. I would say there was the usual experience of not being taken very seriously and not always treated with respect. But I don't think that's cannabis specifically. I think that's unfortunately the experience that a number of women have in business.
Any other questions from our audience? Well, this is good.
I have
yes.
one more.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I have to say, Nancy, if nobody took you seriously before, I'm sure they do now. So good for you.
Has gotten easier.
Yeah. My question is, you mentioned the Wanna Brands Foundation and talked a little bit about it, but I'd love to hear more about your plans for Wanna Brands Foundation in the future and really where you see it going and how you see it growing.
Yes. Thank you for that. So this is new. So the Wanna Brands Foundation is not even a year old yet. So this year has been all about putting the foundation of the foundation, if I can make a bad, cheesy pun here, in place. And so we have spent, a huge amount of time really articulating our priorities. And so where we've really ended up with it is that we have some focus areas, what I call life essentials. So, it's interesting because our tagline is enhance your life, right? But it's really hard to enhance your life when you don't have a safe place to live, when you don't have food, when you don't have health care, when you don't have the right to vote, when you don't have social justice. So those are all things that we support in addition to what I was talking about on the research. But another thing that was really important for us is that we be present in our local communities. So what we've committed to is every quarter doing what we did last year for 420, which we rebranded Forward 20. What we did is that we partnered with a nonprofit in every one of our then 14 markets, all around the issue of food security. All different models, everything from grocery stores and food deserts to food banks to things that help avoid waste to urban gardens. But we want to be present. We want people to know that cannabis is here, that we're real, that we support the communities that we work in, and that we care about them, and that their needs are important to us. And so we go to the local communities to ask what they want help and support with. As opposed to a top-down kind of a model where we decide what's important to them. And so we're doing that 4 times a year. We're going to choose a different topic area each quarter to focus on, and then we will continue to do larger grants, such as the ones that we did for Johns Hopkins But we're still getting our feet under us. We're still learning.
Anyone else? Anyone else with a question? Oh, I think Shauna's going to run the mic over to you.
I have a question for you regarding when you started your business in your garage. I was just curious, at what point did you go through the process of patenting and trademarking your name?
So I didn't actually start it in the garage. That's actually a little bit of a myth. What I did do was I did a lot of testing of non-medicated versions of recipes in my home kitchen because I had school-aged children, and I certainly wasn't making any medicated product anywhere near them. But the truth is you really can't, federally trademark anything. So there's a lot of tricks that the lawyers will tell you about that you can trademark stuff around it. You can probably cookies is one of the sponsors. They're brilliant at this. They've got their branded stuff all over the place. But what we do is we trademark by state for every market we go into. In Canada, we were able to trademark federally. We don't have anything that we have considered to be patentable. I don't think a gummy recipe actually would qualify for a patent. So unfortunately, we don't have anything that's patentable. But I would say that that's actually been one of our strategies, which is that we've decided that we're not a technology company, that we partner with technologists so that we can keep using the best technology that's available. Like our quick onset technology, I believe is absolutely the best in the market. And we license it. It's not ours. But I'm glad about that because if it was ours, we would feel the need to use it forever, even if something better came along. So it's been a little bit intentional also, the fact that we haven't gone that route.
I think we might have time for one more question. All right, this right here.
Hi, my name is Claudia Martinez, and this is gonna be a little bit off topic, but it has to do with your Warner Brands Foundation. I'm sorry if I get a little bit emotional. I lost my son to brain cancer. And I was relating a little bit to the nurse when she was talking about it. And I gave him a lot of cannabis to try to help him. It helped him with his pain. It helped him with relaxing. He was on life support for 3 years. We were waiting for hopefully a treatment that was gonna come through, but it never did. So we put him on life support for 3 years. And then the cancer took over his brain and took him. But since then, I opened up a foundation called Santiago's Angels on Earth, and I focus my resources and time on kids, families with kids on hospice. So I have such a hard time being able to find cannabis for some of these kids, even though, I end up buying them, off the street, so I can give some sort of a little bit of alleviation of the pain and suffering that they're going through. And PTSD also, I feel like it helps tremendously. It helped me after the loss of my son. I started taking cannabis, and I refuse anything that had to do with any antidepressants. All the doctors wanted to put me on antidepressants. I became suicidal. They wanted to put me on antidepressants. They wanted to put me in a hospital. And my husband, who's not here, he's talking out there somewhere, found cannabis, and he said, we need to go through cannabis because you don't listen to anybody. You don't want to take anything, and you want to take your life. So anyway, I'm all over the place a little bit. But what I was trying to say to you is that I opened up the foundation. The foundation is brand new. It started about 1.5 years ago. And right now I sponsor families that have kids on hospice these kids are going to die. We know they're going to die. They are sent home to die. And it's hard for me to get them cannabis, and I wanted to know if there was a way that you could help me or help our foundation, my husband's and I's foundation, to help these kids with a little bit of better ways for them to transition to the other world. That's it.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. The ability to get cannabis directly to a nonprofit is very complex from a legal point of view. And I would really have to consult with somebody to understand how that can be done. I doubt it could be done in terms of directly giving product. It's probably, the best thing probably is to somehow figure out how you could financially create a fund so that people could afford to buy cannabis for their child. There's a lot of complexity in the situation that you're describing with minors and hospice situations. And so I'm happy to talk to you about it more, but it sounds like a fairly complicated situation. I don't have an easy answer for you. Yeah. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining me on stage. Thank you to everyone in the audience who raised questions. I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon, and yeah, do stick around for the next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yo, 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 thank you very much for sticking around. That was fantastic. I just keep learning more and more. You know, I've learned a lot about new compounds this weekend so far, as I'm sure a lot of you have. And there is one way that's very accessible to achieve a non-ordinary state of consciousness that I've experienced right now, and that's lack of sleep. Anybody do that, you know? You can just skip all the expensive compounds and just stay up and hit some Cuban coffee in the morning. So I've got entity contact right now, and they're all telling me to take a siesta. That's the message I'm getting. Anyways, we've got Jason Silva coming up next. He's a futurist and filmmaker. Many of you probably have heard of him, and hopefully are going to see something new out of Jason. So we're going to set the stage for him right now. So there's an uninterrupted view of the screen and of the work that he is about to present to you shortly. Also, I think we've probably got some more folks coming in to join us. So it's going to get nice and packed together in here. I hope everyone's enjoying themselves. I sure am. And it's been a pleasure emceeing for you. Stick around tonight for the dinner. I'm going to bust out some jokes, road test some material that's all pretty myco and psilocybin-centric. Yeah. All right, so we've got a couple more fireside chats. I think this one is Jason Silva. And then we've got a mycologist some of you all may have heard of named Paul Stamets. First time I've heard that guy's name. Kidding. No, great guy. I almost wore the same hat as him today, but I decided to opt out of that one. Would have been awkward. Right on. Yo, everybody who's out here as a sponsor, I just want to shout out again Psychedelics Today. I want to shout out Cookies. I want to shout out ACS Labs. All kinds of great people. Also, Moksha Arts. Big shout out. OG Miami Entheogenic Society. They've got a whole wing here. Shout out Moksha Arts Collective. They actually brought me out to Miami for the first time I ever did stand-up. And I had a lot of fun. So just let me know how much time you need. Can keep it going. I think we probably got another couple of minutes. Oh yeah, okay, come on. Yeah, you know what? I've been meaning to do this the whole time. I haven't done. I have to give myself some ups here for being here. Que pasa, Mufasa, Miami. What's up, everybody? Happy Canadelic. Wow, thank you for making me look good. People are going to say that's a deep fake, and it's not. Not yet, anyways. So I've been having a lot of fun. I'm just kind of riffing up here, You know, I used to teach multimedia production in high school, and I almost never wrote a lesson plan. So, you know, I'm pretty familiar with kind of getting up here and killing the dead airspace. But yeah, so in case all y'all haven't connected with me yet, I love to build relationships. Flag me.
We're living today. A guy called Tim disjointment who follows. One fractures of trauma. Our shell.
Yeah, you know, something I've taken to doing recently is wearing bolos. I don't know, but you know, if you're into style, check out the bolo. I feel like it's an underrated look, and it's something, you know, you're going to see me with a different bolo every day. So I want to say that we're ready to rock and roll without experience.
You know, there's a guy life throws you duty who said, moments let us pass.
So I want to invite you guys.
Shall they move us past
contemplation?
I think you know.
Through a mental health where this meaning and signification, the meaning of someone. You know, they say that a personal into the story you tell yourself about yourself is no longer convinced because we are storytelling I was
the world
and
orient ourselves in.
I want to invite you
Comparative framework.
It's a transitory enchanted in which you hold your breath
You know, life throws you punches and disjointment follows. The fractures of trauma
They're more than mortal because we can create things that allow us to transcend ourselves. And that's what I think is astounding. But the irony of all this is that as we have secured increased material security, we have become wealthier than our ancestors and for the most part can provide a roof over our heads and food in our belly. But our existential disquiet has somehow continued. So even though we can build iPhones and fly on airplanes and do amazing things, the mental health crisis continues. The diseases of despair that originate in this existential disquiet continue because we need more than tools and technologies. We need self-sustaining narratives. We need meaning. And so, why is this exciting? Well, the psychedelic revolution, what we're seeing increasingly through clinical trials and incredible research, is that these psychoactive technologies, these interventions, allow us to radically reconfigure our narratives. And those self-sustaining narratives, if they're not serving us, we can create new ones. I remember a friend of mine said that a personal crisis begins when the story you tell yourself about yourself is no longer convincing. Some people are so poor, all they have is money. Like, if you don't have a self-sustaining narrative, like, that's it. There was a World Health Organization number that really, shook me to the core. It said that more people now die by suicide than are dying from natural disasters and armed conflict combined. Think about that. So there's war, which is horrible. There's natural disasters, which is horrible. There's violence, horrible. All these horrible things that cause deaths and despair across the world, but more lives are lost from suicide. So that's pretty astounding that that's not in the news every day, and clearly the traditional interventions are not working.